That was Can't You Hear Me Knockin' by the Rolling Stones. Before I introduce what the theme is today, I wanted to say, for me, I'm surprised to not talk about more. I think that is the greatest intro of any song in rock and roll. First of all, of course, I'm doing a disservice by not playing it on a Telecaster. but if you know the song, the start is just such a great entry, such a great tone, such a great riff, and it's one of my favorites. And I'm, in the top 20s or whatever they do. I'm just surprised to not talk about more. But it leads into today's topic, which is open tuning. So right now, actually, my guitar is tuned to open G, and I'll tell you why as we get towards the end. But in prepping for this, I couldn't believe how many famous songs were tuned to open G. So first of all, many Rolling Stones songs, Brown Sugar, Can't Always Get What You Want. Keith Richards really loved that for a very bluesy sound, and it obviously allows for playing a different type of riff. The interesting thing about open tunings is a lot of artists will ultimately play around. They'll play around with alternate tunings. So if you see in the comments, I put one of my old videos from like April with Chris Cornell playing Seasons, and that is in a very funky tuning. So I wasn't gonna do it today because I'd have to retune the whole guitar, but you should check it out. And it allows for some more chorus, like when a lot of the way that the strings are tuned, it allows for a more chorusy sound. So especially too, you won't see me muting very much today because you want to have the strings sort of echo, so it creates this sort of like kind of the angels singing sort of vibe. But other famous songs that were in open G were "Daughter" by Pearl Jam. Actually, what's interesting is a lot of artists they'll take the string off for the bass because it kind of doesn't fit in the perfect arrangement of what fits into that open chord. So I'm trying to purposely avoid strumming it sometimes on some chords, to not create a weird dissonance. But the other warning I'll give you, if you play around with open chords, you have to tune some strings up and watch out for busted strings, which in preparation for this happened. I was tuning this up and to a G instead of a B, and boing, it just cracked. So you have to be very careful. And ultimately, you also want to tune it back to where you were before, just so that your neck doesn't get warped. But ultimately, the reason I wanted to talk about this open chord G today is that it is the roots of blues. This is what Robert Johnson and Son House and the original blues artists that everybody reveres would play in, and they would also play with this thing, a slide. So just a quick story before I use it. The Delta blues and Robert Johnson and all his folk were almost undiscovered after a certain point. They were around in the 40s and 50s, and they just kind of went off into the ether. And if it weren't for basically a couple dozen people in Britain in the late 50s, like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards, who kind of resurrected, they kind of met and they would geek out on this American blues that no one was listening to anymore, and they would find old records and they would just fall in love with it and discover that it was this new way they could sort of guide rock and roll, and the rest is history. If you see many Led Zeppelin songs, many Eric Clapton songs, Crossroads, Traveling Riverside Blues, Allman Brothers, a lot of theirs are covers of old Delta blues artists, And the slide guitar is the exact personification or example of visualizing that handoff from that era to what has become decades of people like Stevie Ray Vaughan and John Mayer. So the slide guitar has been around forever, and it allows you to actually have the sound resonate from the scraping of the device on the string. Some people use a literal cut-off bottleneck from a bottle. Some people would use a knife way back like in the 1920s and scrape it against the strings. But you have people who ultimately use this as long as it's smooth. Makes a great sound. So practice a little bit and make sure you know where to find it and kind of hold it at the right angle, and you can end up playing like some of the old blues masters. So here's a good example of it. Eric Clapton's Walkin' Blues, which is of course is a remake of Robert Johnson that he did on his Unplugged album. Hope you enjoyed. Check out anything from Robert Johnson to Bonnie Raitt to Ry Cooder, Derek Trucks, Dwayne Allman. There's tons of stuff on YouTube that's incredible. Johnny Winters. And see you next time. Thanks.